Does the Constitution give the President power to regulate or bail out industries, to commit troops to war, to give foreign aid, to make laws by executive orders, to decide who gets federal aid and who does not, to chisel away at American sovereignty by making executive agreements with foreign entities, or to lock up the natural resources of the nation from being enjoyed by the people?
Well, I would say generally no to all. I mean, there was a lot there.
There was.
I don't think that the president has the power to regulate or bail out industries. I do think that the president, though, as the commander-in-chief, has the ability to engage war-related issues. I'd like to take the war issues out. Okay, but on everything else, I don't think that the president has the power.
Okay.
The federal courts seem to be involved in almost every aspect of American life. Are there any restrictions in the Constitution concerning the kinds of cases the federal courts can accept?
Well, the federal courts, you know, are defined within the Constitution for having a certain role and responsibility, and I think one of the problems is somehow, in order to get into federal court, we said that matters in controversy over a certain monetary threshold, $75,000 right now, can be brought in federal court, and that, along with the diversity of citizenship issue. And that has really opened up the courts to be able to step into just about any issue that's out there. And I don't believe that that's necessary. Keep the federal courts for matters of federal law and constitutional issues.
Jacob, why has the Supreme Court dealt with so many matters outside its constitutional jurisdiction?
Why?
Because they can.
I mean, there's no, I mean, there's tenure for a life. There's no accountability. There's, I mean, the Supreme Court is an awesome power that I think sometimes gets lost in the court, and their desire to address issues that they feel compelling or pertinent sometimes overrides their authority. I mean, and the problem is they're in a bubble. I mean, these people are completely encapsulated. I don't think anybody should be in any role where they're not held accountable for their actions.
In what way has the Commerce Clause been distorted to give the federal government unconstitutional powers?
Well, I mean, the Commerce Clause has been interpreted by the courts to be so expansive. I mean, only recently, I think it was 1995 in a case, I think it was called Lopez, where they said that the Commerce Clause doesn't apply to guns and schools. Did they say, no, the Commerce Clause doesn't apply? I mean, to almost everything else, they've said that the Commerce Clause applies. You know, because everything that we do in a capitalistic society involves commerce, they've overreached. I think it was put forth to ensure that when you have commerce between two states, you know, if you have a disagreement that comes up, you're not going to have one state trying to exercise control over another state, or one state exercise control over citizens of another state.
Right.
And so it was kind of like, it was the neutral third party to regulate disputes that arose in the midst of commerce. Instead, it's been elaborated to, you know, control and restrict commerce.
Has Congress fulfilled its constitutional responsibility to structure and operate a constitutional monetary system? And what would you do to make improvements in the system?
I don't know about Congress. I still blame Nixon for taking us off the gold standard. I think that was one of our biggest mistakes. The thought that we could just print more money. I mean, God,
It's heavy stuff. I'd love to go home and print money.
Well, that's kind of like me saying I still have checks left in my checkbook.
Right.
So,
Let me just write a check for them.
but it doesn't work that way. But somehow when they get to Congress, they forget that. We have people that take out credit cards to pay the interest on their other credit cards, right? And now we are,
Not me.
we are, as a government, borrowing and increasing our national debt so that way we could pay the interest on our national debt. It's unsustainable. I mean, I think right now, by the end of 2011, we are going to have a debt that equals 110% of GDP.
Yeah.
That is third world country status, and I think by 2020, it's going to get much worse. That's unsustainable.
Nearly every public official is faced with questions of public debt. What is your opinion of using debt and how should it be done?
The problem is the federal government can't file bankruptcy. I mean, we really can't. I mean, what are we going to do? All right,
default.
Japan. All right, China. Come on in. You know, let's divide up the assets from this bankrupt estate. It doesn't work. And the funniest part is we have land ownership in federal land ownership that they're using to secure even more debt with. So what happens? You know, China becomes the owner of Nevada because 80% of our land is federal government, and we've used it to secure federal debt.
It could happen.
I think the problem is we need to recognize that's an unsustainable policy, and we can't be relying on debt. We can't have unbalanced budgeting, and we can't have debt paying for debt.
What kind of taxes are the best for government to use to support its proper functions?
Well, I mean, I think I just discussed in one of my last questions how there's a tax that I think could be beneficial to inspire new economies or revival of old economies, and that's a value-added tax if used in the right way. And I think those type of taxes, sales tax, use tax, are beneficial. Property tax, for example, are beneficial, and they're not mandatory. I think what we've done as a government is we've focused on income tax as the primary revenue source, and income tax, through that we've created all kinds of policies and incentives, and we just have this tax code that's just completely not what was intended, and so we've kind of lost our way. Now, that being said, Congress does have the power to tax and spend, and I recognize that, and I respect that. You know, if Congress would have been forthright in the Obamacare and said, we're going to add a new tax, just like we have Medicare tax and Social Security, we're going to add a new tax, and we are going to use the money from that tax and buy health care for everybody, I'd have more respect for them than that. I wouldn't agree with it. I have more respect for them in doing that.
At least being honest about
Well, honest and constitutional.
What authority does the federal government have to occupy land within a state?
Well, I mean, 80% of our land is owned by the federal government in Nevada, and I think, you know, if you're going to own the land, at least pay the property taxes on it. I think that we've created a state for the reason of having a state, and to have the federal government come in and take property away within those borders is inappropriate, especially if it's not done for valuable consideration.
If elected, how will you use your office to help restore true constitutional government to our land once again?
I think that's an easy one. I think that you've got to stand up and be an advocate, and as somebody with a track record of being a passionate advocate, I think it's clear that, you know, if I believe that or somebody points something out to me, and that's the great thing about running is people are calling me almost on a weekly basis saying, oh, I got this issue and the Attorney General ignores me, or I can't get it. And I love those, you know, because...
Well, you're intellectually curious. I like that.
Well, it's not just... I think that one of the great things about this country is it shouldn't matter where you live or what car you drive or whether you've worked to become successful or you're just starting off in your pursuit. You should have the right to, you know, have basic access to advocacy and fundamental fairness. And that doesn't always occur. And especially in the Attorney General's office, where you're there as a public advocate, I don't think that there's a better office to be able to help restore some or fight for some of the constitutional rights of Nevadans.